Okay, welcome back everyone. We now have a panel discussion on bridging the gap, establishing strong international relationships and building trust. Our moderator is Eleanor Slinger, Regional Director, MEA at Investment Monitor. And she will be joined by the panelists, Yofi Grant, CEO, Ghana Investment Promotion Agency, Roger Lachman, Consul General at Georgia in Johannesburg, Dr. Mazdak Rafati, Ludwar International Consulting, Omar El-Gharabali, President Partner at Greenstone Equity Partners, Dr. Martin Kasper from Frankish Industrial Pipes, Engineer Ahmed Taha from the Egyptian Exporters Association Expo Link, and Dr. Osama Toma from the Abu Dhabi Development Economic Development. Welcome to this stage. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for the panel Bridging the Gap, Establishing Strong International Relationships and Building Trust. I think it's a very important topic to discuss. One of the sort of themes that we discovered at Global Data is that geopolitics is a really high issue on the top of mind of many investors across the world, as well as government. So I think it's a really, really important topic, which I'm glad to have our 7 panelists next to me to help to discuss this very wide-ranging topic. Having strong relationships is the backbone to any investment. Maintaining good relationships internationally is even more critical for success of joint projects. Successful relationships are built on trust, and this in turn will turn into long-term sustainable growth. This session aims to look at the best practices for building long-term relationships and maintaining them. So what I'll do next is have our panelists actually introduce themselves very briefly. So to my left is Mr. Yofi Grant. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Elena. I'm the CEO of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center from the Office of the President, but I'm also the board member of the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies representing Sub-Saharan Africa. Additionally, I'm an independent board member of the OA CPS Investment and Endowment Fund, and I'm very delighted to be here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ahmed Taha?
Good morning. My name is Ahmed Taha. I have been working for Expo-Link for the past 2 years. Before that, I was the assistant to the Minister of Trade and Industry in Egypt. And before that, I was the executive director of the Industrial Modernization Center, one of the biggest co-funded projects with the EU.
Thank you very much. Sorry, in no particular order on my notes, I've got Roger Lachman.
Good morning to you all. My name is Roger Lachman. I'm the Honorary Consul General of Georgia in Johannesburg. I'm also the executive chairman of a company called Maruti Global, with diverse investments based in Johannesburg in South Africa, and also operating in other parts of the world. We have investments in business consultancy, training and education, skills development, and a consultancy that I'm very proud of is the ethics and integrity and anti-corruption. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Osama Toma?
Thank you, Eleanor. Good morning. Delighted to be here. My name is Dr. Osama Tome. I'm with the Economic Development Department in Abu Dhabi. Previously, I've been, over the past 30 years, dabbling in infrastructure development, economic development projects with the Arab League and consultancies. And currently, within the Department of Economic Development, I'm part of the trade facilitation and logistics sector, which aims to improve the efficiency of trade within the region, within Abu Dhabi particularly, and within the region, as well as increase relationships with international partners to expand the exports in Abu Dhabi and improve the GDP for a better economic ecosystem. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. And Omar Al-Gharabali?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Omar Al-Gharabali. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for Greenstone Equity Partners, which focuses on the importation and exportation of capital to and from the GCC. We're a group of around 100 professionals that have been responsible for around $92 billion of capital flow over the last 12 years.
Thank you. And Dr. Mazdak Rafati.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Mazdak Rafati. I'm an FDI specialist with focus on SMEs. And I live in Dubai since 18 years and supporting international investors to come into the region and do their setup in predominantly the tech sector. As such, I'm also the chairman of the startup desk of the German Chamber of Commerce, and I also participate in the World Federation of Special Economic Zones, FEMOSA in Geneva, as a board member.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Martin Kasper.
Hello, my name is Martin Kasper. I work for a German medium-sized company as head of corporate development, and there I'm responsible for setting up foreign production plants. And on the side, I'm writing for various papers in the FDI field.
Thank you. And Martin, staying with you, we wanted to start off with talking a bit about protectionism. When I sort of brought this up on the call, you said that there were different types of protectionism. Can you please explain?
In terms of protectionism, I think that there are sort of two types. What I would call protectionism with a big P, the hardcore economics thing, like tariffs, like local content, topics like sanctions, and on account of the geopolitical landscape we're living in at the moment, I think it is indisputable that these are on the rise. But there is also protectionism. It's not quite protectionism, but particularly for smaller and medium-sized companies, it certainly feels a bit like that, is what could be called protectionism with a small p. And that is all those increased levels of regulations coming to you on account of Lieferkettengesetz, supply chain laws, ESG, SDG topics. And while they might be totally understandable and sort of absolutely right and necessary, the reality on the ground is that it makes it really, really difficult for smaller companies to succeed in an international market. So in that respect, it might be worth debating whether we are not entering an era of regulatory overshoot where we're sort of producing counterproductive results at the moment. And you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, the World Bank recently had a survey where they asked 2,400 executives what for them is the most important topic for location decision. And it wasn't low cost, it wasn't low tax. It was political and economic stability, and it was regulatory and legal reliability for the medium and long term. So clearly the things are shifting, and you also see that in terms of the investment sums and the jobs created over the last few years. Since 2016, we are on a continuous slide down from sort of the astronomical FDI figures we had in those days. So in that respect, I think times are shifting, and we need to be careful that we're not producing counterproductive results.
When I bring in Mr. Grant here, I mean, with Africa, I was sitting on a table with a lot of Africans, and actually protectionism could be a good force for FDI. Would you agree?
Well, yes and no. I'm not sure I'd say protectionism, but I'd say equal access to opportunity. I mean, as we speak today, the African continent is a population of 1.4 billion. It's China is about 1.45. India is about 1.47. So the African continent is as big as those other two. But it's probably the fastest growing economy. 6 out of 10 countries, fastest growing countries in the world at 2018 were from Africa. But it also is resource rich, extremely resource rich. 90% of the world's platinum, 90% of the world's cobalt, 90% of the world's chromium, over 50% of the world's gold, not to mention others like lithium, etc., which are the transition, minerals required for energy transition, So it's very important for us to engage in a meaningful but mutually beneficial relationship. And I keep saying that the world has gotten to a stage post-COVID where we all recognize the importance of bridging the gaps. Now, Africa being potentially rich, and by 2050, Africa's population will be 1/4 of the world's population. That means it's a very important market for global growth. Not just that, 60% of that population will be under the age of 30, under the age of 30. So that is an opportunity waiting to happen. That opportunity can best be expressed when there's a mutual understanding and agreement of what we can derive from the partnerships. And on this one, I lean on SDG 17, which emphasizes partnerships for linkages and trade. Now, today, Africa has come together as the largest single tariff-free market in the world, as the AFCFTA. And so, even the way we negotiate, even the way we engage with other partners, global partners, is important. Protectionism might have been important some decades back. But I think today there is a tacit agreement that partnerships for mutual benefit are more pragmatic, more practical, and more dynamic in growing an economy than just pure protectionism. And on the last point, some say globalization is dead. I mean, I say there's a new type of globalization that is based on that should be based on mutual respect and mutual rewards.
And Dr. Tome, can you tell me what sort of strategies Abu Dhabi in particular are employing in terms of stirring that kind of mutual respect and building those relationships?
So I think one of the key things that we have been implementing and employing to stir economic development in Abu Dhabi is providing transparency and regulatory framework that is fostering of a clear policy that follow a clear, transparent approach to governance, because that gives the confidence to the investors for having a stable economy, and it's a level playing field. One of the other strategies that we have, combining it with the transparency and clear policy making, is the digitization. As the previous session highlighted the importance of digitization of the whole ecosystem, Abu Dhabi has embarked on digitizing the full economic ecosystem for trade, and we've been we've done it in a remarkable time period, and it has been applauded by a lot of regional countries, including ones that have been more advanced, in putting a platform that allows the trade activities with its multifaceted venues to be captured and digitized within the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, as well as improving the intelligence of industry by providing another platform that is embedded within the ATLP, the Advanced Trade and Logistics Platform, which focuses on providing local companies who are embarking on exports the intelligence about how they can market their products and what are the regions that have demands for these products, all in one-stop shop. So it's moving towards a single window approach, and I encourage all the esteemed colleagues and audience to visit the booth in DED that demonstrates those two platforms. Combined with that, the level of confidence that is needed also for those investors and or companies that are embarking on exports is to put a sort of a collaboration with ensuring the credit insurance, so that when I export to these countries, I don't have the issue of the fact that I don't know, I'm dealing with a new stakeholder, a new partner, and I need to make sure that I have that confidence in getting the cash flow and getting my commodities sold and paid for. So we have, the Department of Economic Development has teamed up with a credit insurance outfit that's part of the UAE government that focuses on providing that service to these local exporters to add to that confidence and stir the economic development.
Thank you. And Mr. Taha, sort of being based in Egypt and sort of helping with exporting across the region, are you sort of seeing that exporting is a key driver of FDI? Is it the beginning of, from a relationship being more transactional and building more sustainable relationships?
Actually, export is currently one of the main issues that we are working on, not only as the Exporters Association, but as a country. We are doing a lot of efforts into that domain, taking into consideration that the first step we are doing is building trust in our products, in our companies, and in our system. Because without that trust, we will not be able to penetrate the international markets, taking into consideration that our association have been around for almost 26 years. We have been the main body responsible for organizing the Egyptian participation in all international exhibitions, as well as organizing inbound and outbound trade missions. Having said that, recently we have conducted more than one successful trade missions, as well as we will be organizing a sourcing fair called Destination Africa. That's taking place in Cairo this November. This is going to be the 7th round of it. So we are very much focused on export development, from training to inbound and outbound trade missions, as well as exhibitions. All of that is under one big umbrella known as the Market Intelligence Unit, which helps us a lot in studying the market, knowing the culture, which is a very important element in building the trust between any country and other countries, not only between Egypt and the globe.
And beyond just buying and selling products, with building relationships, we've all talked about trust. And I think, Roger, you mentioned something interesting about ethics and integrity. How does that play into building trust between nations and companies?
Well, absolutely true, because, I think before we go into ethics and trust, etc., there are a few practical steps that one should be taking. I often find that companies that are wanting to come into a country just come in with the corporate finance team and just want to plow through to get the deal done. But building trust and bridging that gap is an important part of doing business when you are trying to settle into a new country, sometimes into a new continent. So one of the things that are very important is to respect the cultural differences that are there. So we must accept it, that culture is, the culture changes and that differ from country to country, and more importantly from continent to continent. So understanding the culture of the country that you're going to is so crucial, because if you don't understand, you don't get that right, you're never going to do business in that country. Okay? The other thing is that be patient. You can't get into a country, go through, and expect to come out with a deal. I think it's about being patient, but building the trust as you go through. It's important to be patient. The third thing might sound simple, but it's so important, is communicating effectively. Now, you must be able to at least have an interpreter if they're not speaking in the language that you are speaking. But it's important to understand effectively what what the others are talking to you about, and understanding, and for you to communicate effectively with your own ideas, etc. The other thing that I've seen previously I was a corporate financier. So one of the important things is that companies go in, but and especially the lower level team, when they start doing due diligences, etc. There's no sense of a genuine interest in that country or in developing a business in that country. So it's important to show that you have a genuine interest in being there. If you're going to set up a business in a foreign land, you're going to be there for a long time.
And thank you. And Dr. Rafferty, I think there's no better sort of example of how companies can expand and grow very quickly and understand those cultural values very quickly than startups and founders who sort of use the digital landscape to do that. Can you tell us a little bit about, is that how you're sort of saying, are the startups a new sort of accelerated version of how to expand and grow and build trust quickly?
Thank you, Eleanor. The tech sector, and we saw it, I think, in a report, that it's a driving sector in FDI into the region. Sorry, I'm just trying to be as near as I can to the micro so that everybody can hear me. Because it has a different setup than manufacturing, and it's hit by different kind of circumstances or not. So it's much freer actually to move around, and it decides where to go, and that's where the trust factor plays a huge role. Now, let me highlight a little bit where I think the development has been, which basically addresses most of the other points that we've been hearing. We moved in the recent years from offshoring, then hit by pandemic, to nearshoring, basically bringing the value chain nearer to you, and then again through the recent dynamics, let's call it, in the political spheres, into a very interesting word, which is friendshoring. And this is not something that I've actually invented. If you listen closely or Google it, you'll see these are the leading Western, basically politicians who are bringing into the game a value-based cooperation. Who is my friend and who's not? This is not about where can I make most money. It's actually about value. And value brings the element of trust. And this is exactly the main aspect that all the movements since we are in the middle of it, is happening. It's based on trust. Now, paying a little bit credit to the country I live in and I call home, which includes Dubai as the leading destination for FDI, as we saw, and obviously Abu Dhabi with the movement that it's been doing recently. I think the leadership, the vision of being open to all societies, to invite everybody, ethnicities, cultures, to be part of this. 200 ethnicities living in this country, peaceful together, right? In my school, my kids go together to school with Ukrainian and Russian kids and they play together. Being open is one of the major elements of creating trust, one. Second, I've been hearing a lot about political stability, predominantly in Africa, being very important. The economic stability gives you the power to be stable and make an offer that is credible. I think this is what makes UAE, in my definition, the Swiss of the Middle East, or one of the most safest places currently on the planet to move to, and the tech sector obviously sees it. And the third, maybe the speed to which this country actually not reacts, but acts. We have the first AI minister in the world, and not today. We have it since a couple of years. And all of a sudden, ChatGPT comes and everybody said, oh, AI. Well, there is actually a lot happening already in UAE with the strategic actually development. All of that, bringing it back to the startup scene and the ecosystem that I'm mainly active in, is obviously being seen. It puts actually UAE on top of the address of everybody who is trying to cope, be it in production or in tech, with the current developments. And it's again based on pure trust that it was created based on an offer that is credible and transparent.
That's all well and good, and I wonder, from Omar's point of view, is the capital moving along with this partnership and the growth of these different partnerships? What's the capital flow sort of saying about these different relationships?
Yeah, I think capital flows are incredibly important. What we've seen over the last 2 decades is a huge amount of capital that has flowed from the region into developed markets, be it Europe, US, or Asia. Capital from this part of the world is not, in my opinion, or should not, in my opinion, be used just for a return on investment, because those economies, those developed markets, have been able to use that capital to grow their GDP and grow their economy. In the US alone, there's over 3,500 middle market private equity firms. Each one of those middle market private equity firms is investing into 10 to 15 companies. That's 52,000 private companies that capital from our part of the world is being used to grow. Those companies employ people. Those people have families, kids that go to school, and hence you have the growth of an ecosystem and so forth. that needs to change, that needs to shift, and we need to attract more money to our part of the world so we can replicate that here in the UAE, in Saudi, in Qatar, in Kuwait, in Oman, and other GCC countries. So I think a huge amount of focus needs to be given in that area to ensure that that does happen.
And back to you, Yofi. I mean, we've seen China investing heavily into Africa, and I imagine it's because of those long-term growth opportunities. I mean, how does that fit in with the different cultural values of each individual African nation, and how do you even begin to coordinate and to combine those?
I mean, it's a very interesting question that you raise, but I would pose a situation to Omar. I mean, FDI to Africa increased by some 84% about 2 years ago. And that seemed commendable. But what was it? Less than 5% of global FDI flows. But yet, that is where the market growth is. That is where the remaining stock of the world's mineral wealth is. That is where 60% of the remaining arable land left in the world is. So, what really is the limiting factor? And I guess there have been pronouncements made here. There must be trust, there must be respect, there must be a cultural understanding, and all these contribute to it. But it's just inconceivable when you think of it that this is a continent that has the stock of the world's remaining, mineral resources that you need for energy transitions. It also has a lot of land. I mean, the Congo Basin itself alone provides for an 8% sink for emissions in the world. Yet, there is this resistance of capital going there. And you ask the question of China. I think the Chinese have a proposition that when they are coming to your country, at least from my viewpoint, they are coming to do business. They are not interested in the other aspects of your life. I mean, you choose your politics, you choose how to, relate to other people. Other investors in Africa come with terms and conditions. And the first question you asked me about protectionism, one will ask, why protectionism? Before, it was a mechanism for growing businesses. But then if you look at post-colonial Africa, it was a protection against exploitation. So, there are different perspectives that you look at when you're looking at capital flows. And despite having almost all the mineral resources that are remaining in the world, Africa is still a small, tiny recipient of global capital flows. And there must be a reason that we all need to confront here. What exactly is it? Is it the lack of information, and we spoke about transparency? Is it the lack of understanding of where the continent is? And I remember in 2007 or 8, the title of The Economist, which said that Africa, the dark continent. And then in 2011 or 2014, it was Africa Rising. Well, the continent is still rising. The opportunities are there. The demography says that this is where the next wave of growth is going to be. Yet there's a certain resistance of where the capital is to move into the continent. And I mean, I'll tell you one major obstruction that exists today. After COP27, the issue of energy transitions and achieving net zero put Africa in a bit of a quandary, because this is the continent with the mineral resources remaining, yet it's being asked to hold those minerals in entrapment because it will exploiting them will contribute to increased emissions. But yet the continent provides only 4% of global emissions. So there is a certain unfairness and a certain tension that is so difficult to resolve. And very often when I meet investors, I ask them, you have opportunity, you have market, you have young people, what do you want to see to take your capital there? And very often it's a misunderstanding or information asymmetry or a misunderstanding of what that opportunity is.
Can we ask the investors, the capital markets, what is it that the banking and the institutional investors, looking at you, Omar, what is it that perhaps is holding it back? Why are investors not receiving that message of opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's a question of messaging, really, communication, and goals. So if you look at it from an objective standpoint, what is that investor or allocator looking to achieve? be it on a local basis or from a passive return standpoint. And I think it's really important that when you're talking to an allocator, that you respect his objectives. What is he trying to achieve on a local basis, and what are you trying to achieve from a return standpoint? And those two ends need to meet,
Yeah.
right? And you have to listen to what your investor wants, what your allocator wants to do, and you have to be able to support his goals and his objectives. Yeah? If you're going to try and sit there with a very narrow view on what you are trying to achieve, it's not going to be a bilateral relationship, and it's not going to result in mutual benefit. That's the issue.
Absolutely, and I wonder whether things like soft power has a part to play in this. The UAE has invested and is high on the sort of soft power index in countries like US, UK and Germany are on the top 3 spots. But I'm just wondering whether, Dr. Toma, you can sort of explain to me why is that so important to the UAE to sort of maintain its status as with soft power, and has that helped to build relationships and therefore economic relationships after?
So I think the UAE has been endeavoring very hard to, echoing my esteemed colleagues' points in terms of making sure that they have the tolerance level that allows confidence to bring in FDI from all across the world and assure them with stable, transparent regulatory framework that allows. I mean, I look around and I see the beautiful faces here. More than 200 nationalities are present in this UAE, and it's a testament to the leadership's vision for creating a space, a place that is welcoming to everybody, that everybody can call home, away from home, and can bring in business and flourish. So I think the UAE has endeavored to put its mark on the world map, if you will, and it has done so at least at the Abu Dhabi level from a DED standpoint, the economic development standpoint. We have had efforts to participate under the auspices of the Ministry of Economy in doing comprehensive economic partnerships with many of our partners within the region, as well as reaching out to Europe and the West to find those common mutual benefits and build on the strength of each country. So in areas where we as the UAE can bring in the value of raw materials, we provide that in the negotiations and in the agreements, where in other situations where we need to have products and goods that are delivered by other countries that bring in to the local market, notwithstanding the issue of protectionism, because we do have that synergy, that benefit that you mentioned, that we need each other to have this mutual goal, of course predicated by the understanding and the respect of the cultures and objectives. I think that's what is the key to the success of any economic growth, if you will.
And Roger, I understand you sort of are the Consul General for Georgia and represent smaller countries like Georgia, is that right? Yep, so I'm just wondering how Georgia actually helps, being a smaller nation, how do you sort of orientate that world where you have powers like the UAE with soft power and you have trading blocs like the African trading bloc? How do you sort of fit into that macro lens?
Well, I think one important thing of Georgia is that it has a reputation now of being one of the safest countries in the world. So it is extremely safe. I've seen people walking at 1 o'clock in the morning, walking their dogs, etc. The other thing is that coming out from previous regime, it has now the lowest corruption rate in Central Europe, and it's probably even better than some of the Western countries. So those are some of the crucial areas in which Georgia has made it an attractive destination for itself. It has it's got arable land. It has huge incentives for companies coming into Georgia. The tax rate is very favorable. In fact, I think It's probably one of the best in the world. And that includes corporate tax as well as individual taxes. But again, I think that the incentives for investing in Georgia are just incredible.
And then moving on to sort of MNCs, I mean, Martin, you work in the private industry. I mean, what is the role of MNCs and businesses to help to bridge that gap for governments where perhaps there are topics that governments can't discuss? I mean, what are businesses doing to initiate that gap or close that gap, I should say?
I think MNCs are basically there to generate profit, and not entirely sure if they're there to close gaps. But I think I would turn it around in the sense that I totally agree with the notion that Africa is a massive force to be reckoned with in terms of resources, in terms of youthful population, but it is living far below its possibilities. If you think about it, this entire continent accounts for about 1 or 2% of global investment flows, FDI flows, while a relatively small region like the Gulf states have exactly the same level of investment. And I think that is tantamount to the fact that the Gulf states are so good at creating this safe, legal and regulatory environment. So in that respect, if you have the conditions right, the corporates will beat their way to your door to come to this place. And I think this is why this panel is so topical, while trust is such an important issue. You have to differentiate between financial investment and sort of manufacturing investment. And for manufacturing investment, it is important that you have big enough markets. A lot of African states are relatively small in their own right, but if you create a bigger free trade zone or something like that, and that is what we're sort of referring to in terms of protectionism before. If you lower the barriers, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for Africa at this point in time, because industry logics are changing quite substantially. New resources are becoming more important. So if we're getting that trust element right, I think this would be a great opportunity for a continent if you're sort of taking out the leaf of the book of what the Gulf states have very successfully done.
And you touched a little bit upon regulation and policies, and I think, Ahmed, you probably have a group of companies that, you have to help them with the regulation. And how is that sort of starting to affect the relationships between countries, and what do exporters do in terms of wanting to solve those, the manufacturing standards, for example, ESG standards, there's all these added things that almost could inhibit business?
Well, actually, I cannot hear the question due to the very noisy environment next to us with very high music. So would you kindly repeat it so I can answer you properly?
Absolutely. I was just talking about regulation and how that potentially could hinder business. And I'm wondering what experience you have with the exporters that you represent and how they sort of orientate that.
Well, I will build on what Dr. Rafti have said regarding the nearshoring and the offshoring, because at the end of the day, to be capable of building international relations, you have to have trust in the whole supply chain, taking into consideration that if you would like to export, based on your first question to myself, you have to manufacture something to export, and to manufacture something to export, you have to invest. So it's a chain in the investment cycle from finance all the way up to a product sellable. And the second thing is, where are these products and where are these investments are going to be directed to? Nowadays, after the COVID-19 and after the current situation, the geopolitical situation going on, we have to reconsider the supply chain based on the nearshoring concept, and without trust in the whole elements of this supply chain, I don't think it's going to work, because trust is the base of any healthy relationship between a country, a supplier, and the consumer.
And there's different types of regulations. So, Dr. Rafferty, in terms of technology startups, I mean, it could be GDPR, it could be privacy, it could be AI, data exchange. How do those startups sort of orientate those regulatory sort of barriers, if you'd like, between countries?
Again, the situation, I think, with the tech is slightly different when it also comes to regulation. I think if we take a closer look at what happened in the blockchain and cryptosphere, UAE made an offer for everybody to come, and they came, and they actually created the framework together with the government. So the tech sector and the startup sector is usually part of the process of creating, based on the experience, the regulatory framework. But it is essential that the government is open and listens and gives the offer of exchange to those young talents to basically have an impact on the regulatory framework. And I think this is something that is very, very effective in this country. I remember, I think it was 2017, that the first council, I think led by the Future Foundation in Dubai, started to thinking about how to create a framework for crypto trading and anything that comes with it, to make it actually, let's say, regulated asset class instead of a huge speculation that was going on back in the days. I think, again, ADGM was also one of the fastest regulatory bodies who actually brought in a framework for blockchain companies to come and set up a sandpit here in Abu Dhabi. And until today, through Hub 71 and other accelerators, there is a constant exchange that is happening to create a proper framework that is not top-down, but actually bottom-up. And this is a very, very effective way of creating a framework to attract investment, predominantly in the startup and tech sector.
Absolutely. I just want to touch a little bit upon bilateralism and multilateralism. I guess, Mr. Grant, you would sort of know with Ghana and then its position in Africa. I mean, are we moving towards, I guess different regions have different paces of growth, but what would you think?
Indeed, yes. There are different regions, even in Africa, with different paces of development. But it's a very interesting question because, recently I've read in the literature how many people feel that multilateralism is dead. But when you look at the investment universe, there are about 3,400, agreements, bilateral and multilateral agreements, creating overlays over each other. And a few months back, I did some work with UNCTAD on trying to facilitate a uniform or universal investment facilitation framework that all the partners who were in WTO could participate. And of course, we hit many roadblocks because of the same issue of different levels of development by different countries and different desires of investment by different countries. So it takes us to the big question that you asked when we started this. What really is the gap? What is informing that gap? Is it a question of information asymmetry? Is it an issue of human dynamics, human and social dynamics? Because, I agree. I was an investment banker before I took my job. And MNCs basically are looking for profit. Now, how much of the private sector is willing to sacrifice profit for just universal good? And is that helpful? Because would that bring about universal human development? So there are many questions that, the more we try to solve the problem, the more we provoke questions. There's also history. And just when you thought that the world was getting to a point where understanding and information makes it good, then you have regional conflicts that then open fresh wounds and, creates more opportunity with onshoring, reshoring, and friendshoring. And then also ask the question, is multilateralism still in effect? Or is bilateralism the way to go? But we also all tacitly agree that globally we must come to a point where we understand culture, we all engender trust, and all understand that for the world to survive, we must understand each other. And that is why I think Dubai is a good example of an all-embracing policy. If you have something good and you want to do it, come and try it here. But how many countries can afford to do that? It's extremely difficult. Culture becomes an issue, ethnicity becomes an issue, return on capital becomes an issue, security becomes an issue. So sometimes I think that God's way of solving all this problem was the pandemic that hit the whole world. So you couldn't have solved it in one place. You had to solve it in everywhere, otherwise it would still be a problem. And just when we all thought that we're overcoming the pandemic, then there's a conflict which then affects, the world all over with supply chains and trade chains and all that. But I still believe there's a lot of hope. And everybody's agreement on achieving the SDGs gives us a common platform to achieve certain common goals that we all need to achieve. But how we are going to achieve it is going to be the big question.
Well, I think that kind of alludes to why I asked the protectionism question at the beginning, because although you sort of say protectionism is a thing of the past, but actually if the African bloc works together to sell to each other, to grow its economy, and if you look at China, for example, and how over the lockdown it's built its economy while we were not able to visit, I do wonder whether or not there is something to be learnt about your collaboration as a bloc.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the AFCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, creates the largest tariff-free market. And that in itself is going to engender a lot of industrialization of the continent and intra-Africa trade. Currently, intra-Africa trade is somewhere about 17%. If you compare it to the EU, that's about 67%. So it might be a good lesson, but the outcomes pale in contrast to other places. But intra-Africa investment is less than 5% because of a very low rate of capital formation. So it's a good lesson on how we think the world should go. I mean, China has its own alternative with the Belt and Road Initiative, linking approximately 67 countries with trade. But I will posit that perhaps open trade might be a solution that the African continent shows. Africa is probably the only continent that is looking outward, opening out outwards. And I remember I was speaking to a philosopher friend who says, Africans don't only think with their brains, they think with their hearts as well. So we are very embracing. But some will tell you historically that must have been a mistake. That is why the continent was exploited. And then Africa needs to do things smarter today. I agree. It has to do things smarter. It needs to negotiate better. But the negotiations should be built on mutuality and the respect of the whole world, not just regions. As we speak today, I mean, when you look at investments in Africa, there must always be a premium on it. Because the perceptions of risk in Africa is what comes first. Oh no, it's a risky place. But it's returned more on FDI than every other region in the world. Yet, every investment that comes to Africa demands a premium. So there must be a certain fairness, and I think that fairness will be built on trust. And yes, I agree. For an investor to go somewhere, I mean, there must be a certain understanding of expectations and what it means. But as an investment banker, I know that the Africa continent returns more in terms of foreign direct investments and direct investment than any other region in the world. I know that the Africa continent has a young, growing market that is a consumer market for the future. I also know that the Africa continent has the world's remaining mineral resources that are required for the future. I know that the Africa continent has not less than 60% of the world's remaining arable land left in the world. So where are those misinformation gaps? Why can't we just simply trust each other? What is it that Africa is doing so wrong that it cannot get the same level of attention in terms of FDI than other places? And it's a question that I ask openly because I think all the tracks are there to really embrace that market and make it a very credible part of the global economic growth, especially post-COVID. So, well, I have to say it for Africa because I'm African. But I'm also a global citizen, so I understand what the blocks are and what the other things are. I think it's the soft issues that are the problems.
Yeah.
The rational issues we can all resolve, but the soft issues of ethnicity, culture, location create a problem for the world, not just for Africa.
I would also blame my own industry, the media, who perhaps are not as open to the idea of covering regions in Africa. So there is definitely that. And I want to go to Dr. Tomer about the GCC in Abu Dhabi and the challenges that we've faced in terms of building that trust over time. I mean, what can be learnt from the last 20 to 70 years with the UAE's existence?
I mean, I think the points that my esteemed colleague has highlighted for Africa apply across the globe. I think one of the things that as the globalization movement, if you will, took hold 20, 30 years ago, the world became a global village, and the barriers and borders have sort of melted, if you will. It highlighted a new set of challenges, and these challenges manifest themselves in very different facets. And one of them certainly is the perceptions, the false perceptions that are promulgated through media interests that tend to shift, if you will, the perspective from what is important, what is the priority for the common mutual goals between the commonalities between the nations that you're trying to build these relationships with, to focus on the differences. And I'm not just being philosophical, but that's actually translates to the material impact that prevents a lot of investments from going to Africa, from going to the Middle East. The GCC countries and with the region, they have tried to build more on the commonalities between them, the cultural commonalities, the common objectives that they want. Yes, the challenges do exist as countries grow and their priorities tend to be slightly moving or changing. That creates some rifts or some changes, but they're not insurmountable. Provided that the intent and the vision of the leadership is on the same ball. Of course, that's easier said than done, but I think in the past 20 years, the GCC region and the UAE in particular has made a long stride in bridging these gaps and trying to surmount these challenges and highlighting, or rather focusing on the actual commonalities rather than the differences, and becoming more a hub to attract not only regional countries, but global countries to come in here.
We're coming towards the end of our panel, but one sort of last thought, I thought it'd be good to sort of talk a little bit about COP28, which is coming up here in the UAE. I just wanted to ask Mr. Taha, with COP27 in Egypt, I mean, how did you find, is events like that, world events like that, a great time for bringing people together to talk about common issues? And can that, even though there might have been some conflicts with what was discussed, can it bring people together?
Well, actually, to bring people together, we have to work collectively in one main project. That's why we have been adopting an important element known as Africa Industrial Integration. This Africa industrial integration will be depending on collective approach of different African countries within the same vicinity to be able to produce a component of a certain product. Then another country of this group will collect them together, assemble together, test it, and accordingly we can sell it. I am dreaming of a terminology known as made in Africa, not made in Egypt or made in Ghana or made anywhere else. And finally, to be able to achieve this dream, we have to make sure that there is trust and mutual respect. These are two main elements and two main factors to succeed in any international relation, healthy one. To cut a long story short, trust is the base of everything. Thank you.
Well, just before we wrap up, I just want everyone to almost give a very, very short, and I mean short because we'll be told to leave the stage soon, but are we all moving towards a time of greater collaboration? Are we going to start seeing a paradigm shift from the sort of west and the north to more the east and the south and the opportunities of new regions? So yes or no, and also why?
Yes, I suspect so. And I think natural events and the currents of global events are going to shift thinking in that direction, that there must be mutuality. But I absolutely agree with you. The overriding issue is trust.
Thank you. Roger?
Well, I think, as I said in the beginning, trust is very important, and it's been reiterated over and over again. So, bridging the gap and establishing strong relationships ultimately entails just building the trust and ensuring that there's this commonality of respect as well.
Dr. Toma?
I think, unfortunately, it took a pandemic that happened 2 years ago to bring the world all together and refocus on what is common to all of us, and gave us the opportunity and actually forced us to work together to get into a common understanding of one another and build that trust. And I think it took that world event to happen to kind of bring us back and shake us back into what is really important. And I think that is a good step forward that is being manifested now, and I think it's going in the same direction. And that will only grow, in my optimistic opinion, that focus of commonalities, building trust between nations will continue to evolve.
Thank you. Omar?
Yeah, I think that, as I said earlier, if we want to bridge the gap and attract more FDI into our region and to other emerging and frontier markets, we need better private sector participation. We cannot rely on governments to control and dominate the effort to attract FDI. They can lead the effort, but private sector has to be there. And if private sector is not there, it's going to be a very long journey to achieve the levels of FDI that we need to grow these economies.
Thank you. Ahmed?
I believe that we currently have a golden opportunity. We should not let go. We have to capitalize on everything we have discussed today. We have to join forces and finally build trust based on mutual respect. Thank you. Dr.
Rafferty?
The answer is yes from my side. I think one of the biggest movements that's going to lead to that is the de-dollarization that we're facing at the moment, which is for the first time in history a real option, which is hopefully going to lead to emancipation of the African nations and other host countries in the southern hemisphere that can then fight for their own rights and create their own framework to attract FDI, and then the game ball is a totally different one.
Thank you. Martin, final remarks.
I think there is no doubt that globalization is fracturing. Equally, I don't think there is much doubt that the center of gravity is shifting eastwards. In that respect, I think we should take a leaf out of the book of the Gulf states. On a macro level, they are sort of the bridge between the worlds, which is definitely a fantastic position to be in. And on a micro level, I think they're really good. If you just look at the ease of doing business index of the World Bank, they're getting the practicalities of it right. So in that respect, I think we're heading for difficult times.
Well, thank you so much to my esteemed panelists. I hope that this has been an informative panel for everyone, and I think there's a lot of interesting ideas here, and I want to thank you for attending this panel and hope you have a wonderful AIM conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.